Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us on episode 83 of SCOTONOMICS. We're going to discuss a wellbeing economy tonight. We had hoped to have a small panel for you. We're very pleased that Iain Black, Professor Iain Black, is able to join us, but it is a panel of one, and I suppose a panel 1.5, because I'm going to chip in with my thoughts on a wellbeing economy. We are going to bring you a panel discussion and debate before the end of the year, and hopefully that will have MSP Michelle Thompson and also Dr. Lucas Bunn from the We All Alliance. That was the original plan for our panel, but unfortunately a little bit of diary clash and also illness has meant that we've only got one fantastic panelist this evening, and I'm going to bring Professor Iain Black on stage. Hello Iain, how are you doing?
Hi William, great, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, and thank you for sticking with me this evening, because I know our plans changed slightly, a lot more pressure on you. But timing-wise, we did this because you've written a paper for Commonweal, so you were the original kind of catalyst for us to cover this. So I'm really pleased that we've got you on here. Welcome to everyone who's watching us on Facebook, Twitter, and also on TikTok now. So thank you very much. This is a live interview. Sometimes we don't have live interviews. This one is live. So please, any questions, comments, thoughts on anything myself or Iain are saying, or your general thoughts on a wellbeing economy, please do drop them into the comments section there. Iain, so welcome. And as I said, you had a paper out. I thought it was coming out later this week, but it's actually out today. So we're really pleased to get you on the day of the release. There was also a write-up in the National as well around the paper, which we were actually mentioned in that article as well. So it's tied together quite nicely. Now, we're going to discuss the paper. It's called Well-Washing, Why a Superficial Approach to Wellbeing Economics Will Fail. And it's billed, I think, when you read the paper, as a kind of friendly fire to a discussion paper called Giving Substance to the Wellbeing Economy by Kate Forbes, Ivan McKee and Michelle Thompson. I'm going to put the links to both those papers in the comments so people can read them, and we do encourage you to read both of them. I think together a really fascinating insight into the direction of a wellbeing economy within Scotland at the moment. So before we get into that, I'd just like to start with, I suppose, your idea, your definition of a wellbeing economy, because is it fair to say that it's a pretty contested definition at the moment in Scotland?
I think the short answer to that is yes. I think it is. I'm not sure whether it's contested sort of deliberately, or whether it's just because the idea of well-being can mean can feel as though you're going to have your wellness looked after at a spa, all the way to the incredibly the heavy lifting that sits underneath the wellbeing economy work of the We All Alliance, where they take donut economics and feminist economics and post-growth economics and all the depth into there. So there's a lot of big ideas in, but to me, if I was going to criticism the wellbeing economy, the word well-being is kind of at the heart of that difficulty. So I think it's really talking to this dissatisfaction with where we are. There's sort of a cacophony about that. And if you look at reading the National again today, and there's more suggestion that there's another tsunami of economic bad news coming, in a recession coming. That we've got this dissatisfaction of where we are, and what do we do about it? The neoliberal economics can't be the only thing that we do. So the only option. So with people coming in and looking for these alternatives, but as I tried to point out in my paper, and certainly the short article in the National, it can be quite difficult to hear the lessons of it, because the overall lessons of how you change systems starts to talk about paradigms and mindsets, and the mindsets from which the goal of the system emerges. So these things are quite complicated, and they sound kind of woolly concepts. And I think that's probably what at the heart lies. It maybe not being contested, but there's too many variations on what this is, and we need a unified view, and one I would say very much should be based on the Wellbeing Economy Alliance view, so that we can really get all of the momentum that's behind this. And it's absolutely wonderful to see the cabinet secretary's responsibilities and this coming through, and Hamza's the First Minister's speech and Kate Forbes. It's terrific and a real comparison to the economics elsewhere. But we have to recognise what it is and what the lessons really are before we can push on. Before it's just another bit of words, and our governments and our economists are failing it. So that's where this really comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very powerful idea, a well-being economy, because, as you said, it's clearly kind of related to this idea of health, and also, I would say, a kind of looser connection to just a different way of living. And I think we've focused too much on this idea of materialistic advancement rather than our well-being. I wanted to just show you, I know you know these, but the audience, the two definitions that we're kind of going to look at here. The first one is the Scottish Government definition of a well-being economy, and I would say, it's really, why do we want a well-being economy? This is from the Scottish Government. Right, so to deliver higher rates of employment and wage growth, to significantly reduce structural poverty, particularly child poverty, and improve health, cultural and social outcomes for disadvantaged families. So that's the end goal of a wellbeing economy from the Scottish Government. They do go into a little bit more detail in the wellbeing toolkit, which is available, but that's actually from the economic paper that was produced last year. Now we've got the definition from the We All Alliance. So a wellbeing economy delivers social justice on a healthy planet. It prioritises meeting our needs before our wants. This includes human and planetary health, access to nature, true participation, connection with communities, fairness through institution and dignity to all. Now, I'd be interested to see what people, if they want to drop that into the comments, which one they kind of identify with more. But the first thing I would say, Iain, they're very different, aren't they? You know, I know they're not trying to do exactly the same thing, but I think you can already see that one was very kind of targeted and about poverty, and the other one was much more broader within our kind of overall well-being, and not just at a national level, but also an international and a planetary level. What's your thoughts seeing those two definitions side by side?
I think you've really picked up on the key issue there. The Scottish Government would have gone very focused on poverty, and have set. I find a little kind of. I'm worried by the lack of the ambition that would just reduce poverty. Poverty is just inevitable. Therefore, all we can do to try and reduce it. And I find that sad within a country that's as rich as we are and as prosperous as we are. I think the focus on a particular group is obviously the ones who are being most disadvantaged by our current economic. I can understand that, but it doesn't provide that broader prospectus of what we're trying to achieve. And I think the We All Alliance one, very clearly, social justice on a healthy planet. You can't have one without the other. It allows us to define what that social justice is, according to different groups' needs, and for groups themselves through participation to explore what social justice to them means, rather than saying, well, your social justice is going to be this sort of job with this sort of wage growth and this sort of house, etc. So it's a participative approach in that way. And then I think those other elements of the wellbeing economic alliances is view the dignity, purpose, fairness, participation, and access to nature. These are human ideas, fundamentally human ideas, that our economy is there to serve us on and a healthy planet. So that we are given the opportunities and the skills and the assets to then go and develop an economy that works for us as individuals, as our individual well-being, our community well-being, and then our social well-being. But all of the time, absolutely, and this is it's critical. It's recognizing that it all comes from a healthy planet. And this is something I've been doing recently with some of the students. I've been asking them what dare to do this on an economics podcast, sorry, an economics show, is saying what's the most fundamental rule of economics, and they'll talk to me on this. Oh, it's equilibrium, or it's demand and supply. And I say, well, no, I don't think it is. I think the most fundamental law is that every red cent, every penny of economic value comes from the planet. And I've said go further that and say, if anyone can come up with an example where they can make money without involving the planet, I'll give them £1,000. And I know I'm okay. You know, I get in a depending.
You're fine.
Yeah, in the audience, I can go to 1 million. You know,
yeah.
It's a bit risky. So that's really important, and I think this is this sort of disconnect with the current economy versus the well-being economy.
Yeah. Well, I know we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail, but when you look at those definitions, I certainly think that people can start to see that there's a divergence, and I think it's really clear that the Scottish economy, the Scottish government, and certainly the three MSPs who wrote that paper have a true and strong belief that Scotland needs a well-being economy, and I think that's really clear. And as you said just a little bit earlier, when you actually look at Westminster, this narrative isn't even being discussed at all. You know, Scotland is going into this in a lot more depth than it is in Westminster. So I think that's a really positive step. We've got a wonderful question here from Zagflash, which is, how do we translate the ideas into policy? What can be achieved before and indeed after independence? So I only want you to answer the first part of that. If we're looking at a well-being economy, could you give us some idea of the policies to put a little bit more kind of meat on the bone? And let's maybe say at a local level, a regional level, a national level, and also an international level, because I think, as you've identified from that We All Alliance, a well-being economy is a planetary well-being economy, whereas that Scottish definition from the Scottish government might be a little bit more narrow in focus. So yeah, that'd be great.
So I think that we need to be a little bit careful about, if you don't mind, I'll come around to why, by just looking for policies. So there's a magic bullet in here that if we just get this policy right, if we can just do this one, and because they can often be a kind of a midpoint of impact. So what I would say regarding the policies is that all of the policies that we do have to be dictated to and cognizant of those 5 principles. So whatever, everything can be moved towards being a well-being policy by making sure that at their very heart and integrated, dignity, purpose, fairness, participation, access to nature is provided. I think if we're looking then to take a little bit further, what are kind of well-being policies is that we have at the heart of them, there's localization, there's decentralization, and there's democratization. So again, setting out the principles of how we would then address any of the bills that are going through the Scottish Parliament currently, and saying, are these principles in there? But what that does then require is some sort of fundamental policies, some fundamental institutional changes that are required, and that's very much where I was going to on in my paper. That we can, we could try and have something, call it a well-being rental tax or a well-being pension or something. But if we don't provide the fundamental institutions to support these, the institutions that create prosperity, which are land, local democracies, so we can be involved in our participation and access to funds, then everything else is built on sand. So I think that we absolutely should be pushing very hard, if we come down to Zach's point specifically, for as strong as and radical a land reform bill as we can possibly make in this current climate, because that provides the basis from which we can then do our localization and our democratization and our decentralization, where we can get fairness. We can have access to land because land becomes cheaper, and because people can have a stake in where they live, they're able to drive participation and purpose in their life. So I think we have to be careful, or maybe just sort of let's order our policies by going at those structural and institutional changes that are required in order to make these other ones possible. And that's where, when I was at a terrific session in the Parliament a couple of weeks ago, And Aileen MacLeod was listing out all of these amazing, really well and absolutely totally patronising, well-meaning bills coming forward, the like of which we're not seeing from the demos down in Westminster, but they were all at this level rather than the foundational level, that then give us the access to the assets and the time that we need in order to help build the economy that we want.
That's a wonderful answer, and Zach, I hope that doesn't sound like Iain has tried to kind of like fudge giving the answer, which is a list of wellbeing policies, because I know that's what a lot of people want, and I know the We All Alliance are keen to say to people, hey, these policies should be decided at a local and a national level and a community level, but with these principles help guide that. So I think, Zach, that you could probably think of the policies that you would like to see, considering those principles which Iain has outlined. We've got another comment here, which is absolutely the case. A workforce is in good health, is a well-being workforce. And, I think that Evelyn's also picking up on those ideas of access to health services and support. And these are all things that could certainly be improved if you're pushing an economy much more towards well-being. So thanks for that, Evelyn.
I think that's a really important quote there, a really important idea from Evelyn. Could you pop it back up again? Just yep, my memory's not what it was to think that. But I think this is a really good example of what the principle of the wellbeing economy, or sort of one of the ideas in there, is a failure demand, where we spend so much of our GDP sorting out the problems caused by our GDP growth fetish. So that we spend so much of our health budget on problems caused by the type of economic system that we have, or the poor jobs that we have, or the poor housing that we have. But what I'd really resist, though, is that that health is only useful if it's then turned into something in the economy, and particularly in the formal economy. Again, it's the economy serves us, not the other way around.
Yeah. And I think an extension of that is this idea of productivity, in that we too often focus on your productivity at work, which is the 8 hours of your day. And in a well-being economy, I would see our economy thinking about how are you productive, of all the hours that you're awake, what actually is it you're doing with your life, and how are you enjoying and how are you progressing your own well-being outside of work. And again, I think there's a bit of a difference in the definition of a well-being economy, because we have to take it out of that framing of how you are at work and how the economy progresses, and much more within society. A really good point from Bill here. You mean take back the wellbeing economy, the one we used to have? And I think there's a lot of people who would agree in principle with you there, Billy. Is certainly over the last 40 years, things seem to have changed quite significantly.
Yeah, I mean, we are in the anomaly period. We've just been in for a long time, but not to say the economy back in the 30s and 40s was a great thing, but this single-minded drive for growth and hang the consequences and exploit and extract and exploit and extract is the anomaly, and we know that it can't work long term because we're already at the bottom of the mine. Literally, but also I think we see that in the productivity around that people have had their own labour extracted to the point where they're full, and we can see that. I think this is maybe me stepping outside, but we see that in the statistics, the record number of people who are not able to work. The sickness statistics, and the flatlining product. You can only ask people for more every year on less wages, are able to buy less in the shops and live in and pay more on your rent for so long before they go, I'm not playing that game anymore. Why should I be exploited?
Yeah, I think your first point there is that something that we try and emphasize or re-emphasize on the show is that this period that we're in now, this kind of 1970 to where we are now, is just it's an exceptional time within the history of mankind, and we can't judge our future economy on what's happened over the last 50 years because it's been primarily driven by the depletion of non-renewable energy stocks, and they're disappearing. So the economy economy has to change. And I think this is a fundamental point for me, Iain, is that we're not saying it just should change. It has to change, and it's down to us to kind of decide and then design what that change looks like. Would you agree with that?
No, I think it's essential, a really essential point, that we're either going to have an orderly transition to a net zero economy to deal with the climate crisis that will restrict the global movement of goods in the way that we see it now, or the planet will make sure that we have this restricted view. We are living off reserves at the moment. You know, we're living off the thing that the stuff's in the back that should be there for emergencies. So I think either the planet will close down the form of economy that we have, because let's take an example from a couple of weeks ago, where the Panama Canal was becoming too shallow to navigate, just because of the amount of water. That's a very clear example of how you bog up the global economies. Either the planet's going to do that, or we work out a way to transition in an effective way that is good for, which is this, our needs, not our wants, and making sure that everybody's needs, rather than the needs of a very few, are satisfied.
Yeah, that's great. And to cover that, just kind of finally, I think that's the difference between, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail, the difference between your approach and the approach from the three MSPs was just this idea that we just need to change the economy that we've got slightly to make things better, without really, I think, a fundamental understanding that the economy is this exceptional period which must change and has to change because of the resources that are being used. Now, we've got quite a few questions to get through. So, and in a lot of big areas, and I want to try and bring in as many questions as I can. I will get through all of the questions, but I'm just trying to put them into the kind of right order for our narrative. So, thanks to the couple of questions that we've had so far. Okay, now let's think. A couple of really direct questions. Can the Scottish Government, do you think, deliver the type of economy that's outlined as a wellbeing economy, either by the three MSPs in that paper, or by the We All Alliance, or what you consider under the current devolved settlement? And can local governments do that within the current settlement that we have at the moment?
I think the answer is clearly no to both of those points, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't start working these principles through on the things that we can control. And one of the important things from sort of 10 years ago, when I first started doing some work with Catherine Trebek on the Wellbeing Alliance, Wellbeing Economy, was just about the narrative of government. So the making sure that we're not just constantly saying, we'll do all of these nice things and grow the economy, which is that bit in the conversation where you say, that guy William Thompson, he's absolutely terrific, but. And everything before the but was you can ignore that, and it's the same with that measure of economic growth. So I think that there's a lot that we absolutely can do within the current settlement, while constantly pushing for more powers in order to sort of finish the task. But there's nothing. Well, I suppose we're on the political complexity of whether the UK government might exercise a Section 35, but changing the local government structure in Scotland is under the purview of the Scottish Government, the devolved settlement. So is land reform, so is the way it's set up, the Scottish National Investment Bank, for example, so the way that it can insist on how policies are drawn up, how it could work through the UK National Care Service. So there are pockets that are really important foundational elements that we can do, as well as more than enough to keep us going in the meantime, while we demonstrate, and this is where I'll declare a position as a supporter of independence, while we're making the case that we can use the powers, and we need more powers to make a better case, and that we are that smart enough, rich enough, a group to which independence can be trusted. So I think that the importance of let's push up against those boundaries, but let's not think that because we don't have anything that we can just say we don't have everything, therefore we shouldn't get started, because there are plenty of things that we could move on and move quickly on.
Yeah, great. And certainly our position at SCOTONOMICS is that, economic transformation, something like the just transition, or a well-being economy, is impossible within the current devolved settlement. There's certainly a lot of things that can be done, but this idea that a kind of, for want of a better phrase, a sub-national level government can perform an economic transformation is we think impossible, especially if it's not supported by the central government. So that's our kind of like clear position on that. I've got a comment here, and I'm just going to bring it up, and we're going to come back to it. And this is this idea of sustainable economic growth, which is incredibly popular, and a lot of people support that, who have all the kind of principles that you and I share, who want to see a well-being economy, and I think this underpins the approach from the three MSPs. So we're going to come back to that, but Hashbury, thanks for that comment. Okay, so next question I've got for you is those last two questions. I kind of leaded into a little bit there, but can Scotland do it under the devolved settlement, and can Scotland do it when it's independent? What do you think the paper written by Ivan, Kate and Michelle would say to those two questions? Do you think they're taking a very different approach, or do you think they'd be broadly in agreement with what you've said?
So their paper very much focused on the goal of their goal was reducing poverty and addressing net zero. So they focused on a couple of areas that the Scottish Government, really important, central to the Scottish Government's agenda, that they can act on. So I think they were kind of agreeing, and I don't want to speak for them, but by choosing those areas, they're saying these are areas that the Scottish Government has power under. We have some tax raising powers. We have some welfare powers. We have powers over housing, etc. So we can. There's much that we can do about poverty. So I think there was by choosing those ones, those areas, they were probably making that case as well.
Okay, great. And within the idea of as being the economic paradigm that we have, and this is something we're going to spend a little bit of time on, because I want to make sure that people are really clear with the definition and also that kind of categorization of different economic paradigms. But do you think that paper was clear that that a well-being economy could be delivered within the economic paradigm that we have, which is, as an example by Hashbury's point a little bit earlier, this idea of it's sustainable growth that will deliver it?
So this is where I think I'm not sure they, and I'm meeting one of the MSPs later on in the week, and I'll speak to them about this. So I'm not sure, but I'm not sure there's a recognition in it of that they're closed in by the thinking around their paradigm, that they think they are moving outside their paradigm by saying we'll move to sustainable growth or green growth, or that we'll use the same tax and spend, but we'll direct it towards the things that really matter, and we'll be better at taxing and spending than everybody else is. I get the impression that they do think that that's a paradigmatic shift, that is something different, rather being enclosed in essentially a growth-based economy where we will tax and spend according to priorities, where the precedence is given to the economy, and whatever the economy can produce provides us with the assets from which we can create any transformation. So I'm not sure they quite. I'd like to explore this one, whether it's a case of they fully get it, but they just don't believe this. That it's the only paradigm worth exploring, or whether that broader point about understanding what paradigms are and recognizing that they're restraining and constraining your thinking, and therefore the only solutions that you can see come from your existing paradigm. I'm not sure of that.
Right. Well, we are going to discuss it, and I think I've got a brilliant question from Charles here, which I think leads us into that. See what you think. Would adoption of a wellbeing economy not cause hostile pushback from classical economists and the money markets? Now, this is a really good introduction into this idea of a different paradigm. So before we go to that, would you like to just kind of briefly say or cover what you think the kind of current economic paradigm is, what it's focused on, and then how a paradigm which focuses on a well-being economy, how different would that be? And as briefly as you can, because I know that's a good 2 hours, 2 hours conversation there, Iain. But thanks for that question, Charles.
Yeah. So I think the existing one, it really is. We take the view of Marx on this about a capitalist society or a global capitalist perspective, where the point of the economy is the goal of the economy is to grow, and from that growth, prosperity then can be spread through taxation. And that anything that holds back the growth of the economy, the barriers should be brought down, because the growth brings us good things, and the markets can be trusted. To go to Charles's point, I mean, I'm not sure I'm quite qualified to answer all the way that down, but I think absolutely they would be the well-being economy as described by Forbes et al. And by Hamza Yousaf's not a big threat. It's not a big threat to where they are, because they're saying we'll have a well-being economy that grows the economy, and then we use the tax and spend. Well, they're saying that the business and the markets are going to be brought into that, whether it's to help fund the net zero transition or to provide housing. You know, the market is central to that. So I think the kind of fundamental point about the well-being economy is to go back to this definition of delivering social justice on a healthy planet, and you take those as a systems goal, and the paradigmatic shift in many ways is seeing the economy as subservient, and seeing that people's needs rather than the need of the economy are subservient. I think it also brings into the role of a much stronger role of government, to rather than be a laissez-faire with the markets, to say actually we have a set amount of economic capacity in this country, and it's the government's role to make sure that economic capacity provides for the needs of the people. So once we've sorted out decent housing, decent food, active transport networks and public transport that's appropriate, and of course networks to rural areas, that these are the areas that the government supports, market makes, puts the conditions around, and particularly in the middle of what is a climate crisis, and I think very importantly a fossil fuel cost of living crisis, that the government should not be overly concerning itself with those parts of the economy that don't deliver for a climate crisis, for the cost of living crisis, and then also provide support for the SME Scotland, who's tend to be much more embedded in their communities and spread community wealth around. Does that?
Yeah, I think you're painting quite an optimistic picture as well of what can be done with the economy we have at the moment, which is I'm probably a little bit more pessimistic. Okay. And I think those two paradigms that you've kind of painted, I think, are very different. And you know, when we're kind of talking about a well-being economy, I look at the kind of current economic framework and I think, is it able to deliver a well-being economy? And I kind of look at the policies like software, you know, think about these policies. How do they work within the economic paradigm that we've got at the moment? And that kind of paradigm's like the hardware. And I just look at these and I think, I can't really see how the hardware supports the software. I just don't think that they're compatible. And it looks like when you read a lot of stuff around, that's coming out from maybe some other areas within the Scottish economic kind of analysis, as well as maybe some of the organisations a bit closer to the Scottish government. I think there's an idea that these kind of policies, this software can work on the hardware that we've got, and I think that's where I kind of place this economic paradigm of there being two very different frameworks. Now, I think you've kind of taken a systems dynamic approach to that. When you've looked at this, please go, Joe.
Yeah, no, that was was a question when we were discussing the interview that it really got me thinking. I was wandering around with the dog today, having to thinking about this software versus hardware approach. And my view, I suppose I took a different definition of what hardware is. I'd maybe, in my view, that the hardware is the land, is the economic capacity of the country, is the people, is the buildings and the institutions. And absolutely, the software, the software can subvert that and can move that into a different towards a different goal and to different outcomes. And this is why systems goals are so powerful, because as soon as you change the systems goal, all of the materials, flows, stocks, buildings, institutions within that system then start to act for the new system goal, and therefore. I was wondering if your hardware is almost kind of that part of the software that stops you cracking the chip and using it for your own purposes. It's like that, BMW putting in heating seats that you have to pay a monthly subscription to, and then having something in there to stop you subverting it. Because something else. There's a really good example of how that works, and we saw it during COVID. Now, I use this. I've done this with children's audience, and I've done it with undergraduates, and the children are much quicker with it. If I say to people, how do we ensure that within 1 month there's an active transport network to 95% of the doors of all of businesses and households in Scotland? How do we do it? And I say to them, it can absolutely be done. Within 1 month, we can make sure we've got an active travel network to everywhere in Scotland.
Yeah. So this is looking at the idea of actually having people doing stuff and communities doing stuff rather than building an infrastructure. Would that be?
No, it actually just simply says we've already got one. It's called a roads network. And so we've already got all the places we need for wheeling and walking, etc. But at the moment, we let these incredibly dangerous things called cars fly up and down them at great speed. Now, during the COVID emergency in Edinburgh, and of course, this was imposed and it was not participative as it should have been, and we would do it in a different way. And absolutely, your point about communities being involved, but spaces for people in Edinburgh delivered 56 kilometres of cycle path within a month. And it's taken them best part of 8 years to do 5 kilometres the traditional way through the city centre. So I think at that point about the hardware, that we have this with incredible capacity, human capacity, energetic capacity, purpose. We've got the institutions, we've got the buildings, we have these there, but they're being used for different purposes. So that's why I think the systems goal matters, and that's where that subtlety, I think, about your hardware, software, and what's stopping the hardware being used. I might modify that.
Maybe I'm looking at an operating system. Maybe that's the analogy they should be using.
Yeah.
Well, to kind of, one of the main reasons I liked your paper was because you referenced, I think the one thing that I would encourage every single person who wants to understand how you do economic change, and this is a paper by Donella Meadows, who was one of the authors of The Limits of Growth, the Club of Rome report in 1972, I think it was. And it's a relatively short paper. I think it's like 12 pages or something like that. And it's called Leverage Points, Places to Intervene in a System. And the first time I read this I read that when I was an events consultant. So I was going into organizations and I was trying to say to them, this is what you need to do to improve the events that you're running. And I read this and I just thought, this is absolutely incredible. This understands change. And when you look at an economic system, it's exactly the same. But when you look at the suggestions that are being made to transfer the economy we've got now to a well-being economy, they don't quite marry up to actually how you make a significant change as designed within this framework that Donnell Meadows created. Would you like to talk us through briefly how useful that idea of leverage points is when you're trying to make a fundamental change to an economy?
So I would just recognise, again, also just how sort of transformational my own thinking coming across this article was, but also how frustrating it is, because of now the taking a leverage points view, as I do often, I get very frustrated at what policymakers think is going to be transformational. The idea that £5 or £10 or £15 as a welfare payment is transformational is it's really important when you've got no money to put the heating on, but do not think for a second that it's going to stop, it's going to halt poverty in Scotland. Alleviates the cold or alleviates hunger, it won't. I think the metaphor is really important. We all get leverages, and this is an Archimedes quote as well. You give me a lever long enough and a pivot on in which to place it, and I can move the earth. And then we can kind of recognize, we understand how seesaws work, we understand how levers work, and trying to find something where by placing the fulcrum in the right place, where our work can be really powerful. And unfortunately, much of what happens, I think, at a sort of a government level is if you've got if a heating system in your house is not working, they're too busy down at saying, well, we'll try and find different coal, or we'll polish the coal, or we'll increase the amount of coal that goes into it, etc., rather than looking at the plumbing. And rather than looking actually even further along, right at the leverage point, instead of replacing the whole plumbing systems, to think, well, people actually don't want heating; they want warmth. That's the fundamental level. We as these great apes, the bold apes that we are, require clothing, and we require heating, and we require cooling. Now, an air conditioning system or a heat pump or a gas central boiler is just a way of delivering the service that we want from it. But of course, the real big pivot there is to say, well, we need insulation, and to stop thinking about needing to get to provide more coal or more gas, or change the coal from gas and gas to electricity, etc. So what we do is we get fixated in the current system of having working with the oil majors to try, or the energy majors, to try and fix something where they don't want energy independence, which insulation brings you. That doesn't work. Doesn't work. It doesn't work for SSE. Unfortunately, they've got shareholders that they need a monthly income from us to support. So I think if we coming back to what leverage points does, it was born of frustration by Donnell Meadows, in the same way that you had with your example of, there's got to be a better way of doing this, and let's look at how you do move them. But what it absolutely tries to recognise is this idea that we come to a problem with a particular mindset. Mindsets are a set of beliefs, knowledge, and cognitive capacities. So there's an entrepreneurial mindset that you come with, and you've got to be resilient, you've got to be good at risk, etc. Now, these are the point where, if we get people to move, then solutions become possible. While Keir Starmer and Hamza and Kate all think that economic growth is an essential part of their economic mindset, all of the solutions they will ever come up with fit within that paradigm. When we go back to what we said earlier, there's many of us can think about examples of where growth wasn't the key, and it allowed us to the great work that was done in cooperatives, for example, or local wealth building, or community asset transfers, and the work that can be done there. All of these things make so much more easy when we don't always try to force it down that mindset, which is one of the most powerful leverage points, but it's also really tough. Yeah, this is the other point about it, that if it was easy to change, to have these big changes, then we would do them. And in that instance, just think about how you could possibly remain as a member of the Conservative Party if you'd said on camera, or you went to a local branch meeting and said, you know what, I'm not convinced that this economic growth thing's working anymore. You know, they're going to say, well, sorry, the Lib Dems are on a Tuesday.
We're not the party. We're not the party for you.
So you lose identity and experience, and
yeah. No, those are really important points. I think that's a good summary of that kind of importance, and I would encourage everyone. I'll put a link in the comments to that paper. It really is. I think it's transformational. And as you said there, there's I think Donnella lists 9 things that you can do to affect change, and the things at the top are easy and have minimal impact. And as further as you go down, you get to the first one, which is a complete change in the paradigm. And then I think the second one, which is a change of the goals of the system. And these are the things that we need to do to turn our economy into a well-being economy. But if you look, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, and I would just say that I don't understand the most powerful leverage point. The most powerful leverage point is to transcend paradigms, and I'm not there yet. I still think in terms of paradigms and then systems goals from there. So I think the other point, there's always some more insight that comes from that paper. It's one of these ones to come back to and come back to and come back to as you refine your understanding.
Yeah, I just looked at it there. It's less than 20 pages. So if we finish on time, then people have got enough time to read that tonight before they head off to bed. Now there was one question that I had to pick up on and to finish with it, but I do want to get through any more questions. So if you've got any more questions, please do drop them in. And I've got this now. Now I assume you're talking about Karen and I within your paper, and there's a line that says, indeed, government should fund high quality public services, but I will leave the modern monetary theory based critique of this phrase to others. And even if you weren't talking about us, I'm going to address that now. So yeah, within your paper, I think that was just saying that the government has the capacity to do things differently. Is that a fair summary? Maybe just even more straightforward than that. It was just a quote from them saying that essentially that's the only way government funding works. Okay. So I was just picking them up on the fact, this whole idea that the only way that we can fund anything is to grow the economy, grow tax base, pay for it. That was the fundamental understanding there. So I was throwing a softball up for you to knock out the park in terms of the other view of how governments can fund. Yeah, well, of course, it's not that's nice, and I'll say it's not the other view. It's the true situation of how a monetary sovereign government funds itself compared to a non-monetary sovereign, and a really important distinction that I've made in the Wellbeing paper that we're writing is that the UK government is a currency issuer, and it can deal with these problems very differently compared to the Scottish government. And those MSPs were correct that Scotland can only raise the revenue from taxes. It can only spend the money that it's able to earn back from the economy because it doesn't have the power and the privilege to create currency. And when you have that, you can spend that into economy in a completely different way than you would if you were collecting money back. So it's a really strong point, and I know you kind of alluded to it within that paper, but we certainly think that an understanding of how the monetary system really works and the importance of understanding how a currency allows that kind of power and the privilege is hugely important when you're considering an economic transformation. And we would argue that even if Scotland was independent, it would be exceptionally difficult to form any kind of economic transformation without the power and the privilege that comes with being a currency issuer as soon as possible. So thanks for that softball, Iain. We'll never miss that. Yep. Can I just another thing? And I absolutely understand, and I've known Karen for a long time. We started her campaigner and activist journey in Leith a number of years ago. And but one of the things I would say about your being is the correct way. Now, perception's everything. So if the governments think that the only way that they can fund is through tax and spend, then that becomes reality in their mind. And so this talks to the paradigm shift. It talks to being able to get that, but it also talks to the fact that rational discussion is not
by any way, the only way that's going to change. You know, again, think of the identity issues that the Conservative Party have if they admit to the fact that that it's not tax and that they have to grow the economy in order to grow tax. What's the point of a conservative fiscal approach in that way? So I would just sort of soften it on that perception is reality in this way, but does give an example of why we work at that level. Because when the Scottish Government get that, or sort of the SNP hierarchy get that within the Growth Commission based work that the Independence Prospectus is based on, then fast transformation can occur.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That perception is reality, I think, is really important. So just to finish, and if there are any questions, I would just kind of like to move to a kind of, let's say, 5 years, and the Scottish Government is following this this idea of a wellbeing economy being delivered within the kind of current constitution. I'd just like for you to say, where do you think the Scottish economy would be without this paradigm shift, this understanding that growth cannot, or is unlikely to be able to fund this transformation, and, you know, as I said earlier, and the economic powers not being there? But where do you think we would be as part of the United Kingdom, and then maybe, let's say, 10 years where we were an independent country, and with those kind of similar constraints within the same economic paradigm that we have at the moment?
That's a really great question, really difficult. So I'm going to predicate my answer on that. In those 5 years, the Scottish Government, led by the least, in fact, from a climate change scientist perspective, the least dogmatic party, which is the Greens. Their approach is, the Scottish Greens, is far more based on my understanding of evidence than others is. That if the Scottish Greens have led the SNP towards radical land reform through through various taxation and regulatory measures, and that we're on our way to local government reform at that hyper-local level, and that we've brought to bear the enormous funds that are available in the local government and other pension funds, as well as the money that's in the available from any land taxation and from the Scottish National Investment Bank. To predict where we would be and what we were doing would be very difficult, but I think we've been really hopeful and dynamic. Because if you give the resources, I did a session maybe about a year ago down at Sustaining Dunbar, and they're just a room full of incredibly smart, dynamic, passionate people who everything that they wanted to do every good thing they wanted to do was difficult, and all the bad things were easy. You know, they wanted to put a turbine up to generate electricity in order to keep the bills down in the local one of the aged care facilities, but it ruined the sight lines up to the Lammermuirs, and they weren't allowed to do it. So with those, crikey. So with those changes at those fundamental levels, then I think what we've got is people energetically and excitedly getting in sync, because we want to sort this out. We saw that with COVID. That when we didn't have, and I know there are many different experiences of that, but those people who had agency around COVID looked after their communities. They used all of their energy and had to make up systems because they weren't in place, and they did that. So I would think that in 5 years we'd have a patchwork of really exciting energy, insulation, maybe vertical farming, transportation ideas, you know, that local wealth building, co-ops setting up, and as a demonstration of ability, and then in 10 years' time, systematizing that, as long as we've taken the time to set up a central bank, set up a currency, launching it at the right time, etc., and bringing the huge expertise capacity that's out there in the 52 to 54% that makes up the independent supporters, but that is not being engaged currently because we've got bills to pay and things are difficult. So I think that gives an idea, but I think it'd be the hope, you know, as much as anything, the hope and the sense of agency that we can do something, rather than just sit back and listen to one group of people saying the same thing as the other group, but pretending it's radical changes on its way. So,
fantastic. Well, that is an optimistic picture, and I'm not going to put any dampener on that. So I'm just going to say, Iain, thank you very much for that. I think it's been really informative. Thanks very much for the interest and the engagement on the chat. We are going to come back to this idea. I think it's one of the two kind of the transformational ideas that the Scottish Government has that they're pushing ahead with, along with the just transition. So thank you for your work. I encourage everyone to read the paper, the paper that this was kind of in response to, and also that fantastic piece by Donnelly Meadows. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks, and we've got an absolutely incredible interview around the power that comes from oil and the impact it's had on our democracy. It's a wonderful interview, and we're going to have that in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you then. Bye for now.